Hi guys, this is Rob from RuinWorks again, coming at you with our latest release. This is for May 2023, release number 2. It's a couple of days late and I'll get into that in a bit. The scene itself is for Black Rat Hall. There was already a scene for Black Rat Hall, but what I've done this month is create the surrounding environment for Black Rat Hall, so it isn't just the Thieves Guild scene by itself, but actually a neighborhood, a full city scene. It's going to fit in with the rest of the Sure proper scenes, which are up to 5 right now, and they will all link together at the end to make a full-fledged medieval fantasy city. So here we can see Black Rat Hall in the center of the map. You can kind of see within that square. Black Rat Hall has not changed at all. All the traps and doors, everything there that was included in the original Black Rat Hall scene is still there in this scene. The only change are the perimeter buildings, which are now fully fleshed out and contain at least a floor and a roof, but most of them will contain 2 or 3 floors, being the cellar, first and second floors, as well as the roof. I'll also note that the original Black Rat Hall scene is still in the module, but I've renamed it Black Rat Hall Alternate. That's there in case you want to run the scene without the surrounding buildings. So the idea behind putting in the surrounding buildings was to create more of a neighborhood for Black Rat Hall. I feel like this is going to be a rougher neighborhood, somewhere where the thieves can call home, where the poor end up going because they have no place else to go. Those down on the luck will often find their way here, and this is probably the part of the city where there'll be fences where you can sell things that are slightly illegal or you don't want to give to the authorities. This is kind of the neighborhood that would host all of those things. I'll just run through it with a couple of highlights. So firstly, here on the left side of the scene, this is a slightly bigger structure. It's meant to be a boarding house where people might rent a room for a day or a week. Probably has some rough landlords. The rooms are more on the second floor, and you'll see those in a second. Going up just around the scene, you can see there's all these houses here built closely together, meant to be kind of ramshackle housing, put together in tight spaces, leaning against each other. Probably have beams between them in places like I show in here to help support each other, but also that will act as great places for thieves or PCs to run along, to hop onto roofs, to just simply adventure in the city. Over here in the top right, you can see there are some stairs leading up to the second floor on the outside of the buildings. That's because there are a set of catwalks here that run between these buildings on the second floor. I put this in here mostly because I feel like buildings that are being built close together, being built on top of each other, would have to have some means of getting between those areas. And also I think it would be fun for chase scenes if you have PCs who are chasing a thief for information, or trying to find somebody who's hiding in this part of the city and might run away. The catwalks provide an excellent way for them to do that. Like I said before, there are 20 new buildings, and that's most of the reason why this release took so long, and I apologize for that, but I think previously the most buildings I've ever done in one release has been 10, maybe 12, I think. So obviously it's a large amount more of buildings, and that's because I was trying to put them as closely together as possible. The good news is that's an extra 20 buildings that I will be able to throw into other scenes. I can start reusing these. Okay, here in the bottom right of the scene, that's just a couple of notes I'll put in. There is a bit of a guard tower along the city wall here in the bottom right. Not much, it's not meant to be much. Guards probably avoid this part of the city as much as possible or are bribed here. It's just a little lookout post. Here at the butcher's shop, there's the butcher here, and he's got a little pig pen running around out here. If you switch to your tile tool, move the overhead tile out of the way, you can see that these pigs are separate tiles. So if you don't want the pigs there, or you want to put in a different animal, if you have a different idea, you can put whatever you want into the room there. Over here, also in the bottom left, there is also just a little woodcutters area that just has a fence kind of around it. Might just prove a cool obstacle to have when people are having those chase scenes I mentioned. And then lastly, just of small note, is in the bottom left hand corner here, I have a place where camps have been set up. This is also where I would imagined the poor and unlucky people of the city end up. And one of those areas would be this little camp here filled with tents. If you look at the roof level, you can see these are all just tents and ramshackle huts put together, and desperate people living in this area. If I go up to the second floor here, you can see what I meant by the boarding house. They're just single rooms kind of on the second floor of this overall building, probably rented out. You could also double perhaps as a brothel, as these could all be separate rooms that are used for the brothel. Okay, I also want to take you to the top right of the scene here where I mentioned the catwalks. You can see them here, kind of looping between some of these buildings around the corners. Stairs coming up to the second floor where there's roofs that people can walk on and kind of hop along the rooftops as opposed to the ground level here. Again, I put these in because I thought they'd be cool to have chase scenes here. You know, some noble's daughter might be on the hide, trying to get away from her father's men. PCs come and she flees and runs, and she can start running around these catwalks to get away. Or maybe the PCs are simply robbed, and the thief decides to run away through some of these catwalks. If we look at the roofs here now, again, you can see pretty much the entire scene except for some of the higher levels in Black Rat Hall itself. All of them have roofs, and it looks pretty good when you have a token selected, and I'll go over that in a second. Last thing I wanted to highlight was the cellars. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings that have cellars incorporated to them on the scene, and I've also included a secret passage between the cellar in Black Rat Hall to one of the neighboring cellars of one of the houses. Specifically, this is the boarding house. Got a token over here set up, so I was just going to show you what the token would see when he's walking through the town. So this is essentially what a player would see if he has his token selected. So essentially any roof that the token has line of sight to should appear. So I've set up these catwalks to also be roof tiles, so that's why the player can see them. And if he goes underneath them, they disappear. But if he double clicks on one of the exclamation marks, he can use the ladder and get up to the catwalks. So where the catwalks are, I'll also note I did put in, on the second floor, these invisible walls where I just wouldn't want players to like go off the catwalk and just start walking in the middle of the air of the second floor. So I've put in a few walls here just to help guide them around in certain places where I thought they might have a bit of difficulty. Just keep that in mind. If they're flying or something, these walls will block their passage. Okay, I thought this scene was a good opportunity to just go over some levels, tips, and tricks that I wanted to make sure everyone understood, because I do use levels extensively in my scenes. So if you have a token, if you right click on your token, you will bring up all the token tools, and in the top left here is your elevation field. So currently you can see the token's elevation is set to 0. You can set it to whatever number you want. So if I was to enter 10, it would send this token to 10. Now entering 10 and entering plus 10 are very different here. So if you enter plus 10, it will add 10 feet to his elevation. So now he is at elevation 20. It doesn't set him to elevation positive 10. So this doesn't really make too much of a difference. I think that's understandable. The annoyance for me comes when I'm trying to set a token to a negative elevation, such as the cellars. If I'm setting a token to that elevation, if you do minus 10, it doesn't set them to the elevation minus 10. It simply subtracts 10 feet from their current elevation. Keep that in mind when trying to set a token to a negative elevation. You can't set them directly to the elevation. You have to subtract the correct amount of feet from the current elevation to get to that negative elevation. So if they're at plus 10 feet as they are right now, I would have to subtract 20 feet to get them down to the seller's level. While I'm going over levels, tips and tricks, I think it would be amiss if I didn't go over large creatures. So I know I've run into this personally. When I have a large creature that I'm dropping onto a map that uses levels, they do not appear on the correct elevation. So I am currently on the ground floor. So I'm going to go to my actors directory here, and I'm going to drop this large giant spider onto the map. And you see he does not appear on the ground floor as I would expect him to. However, if I go to the second floor, there he is. Why is he on the second floor? I put him on the first elevation. This is really annoying. It annoyed me to no ends for so long. And if you right click on them and look at the elevation, they are actually set to an elevation of 0. What's going on here is that the levels module will provide a line of sight elevation to each token. So for medium tokens, that elevation is set to 6. You can see under identity, token height, line of sight elevation is 6. So that is levels placing this arbitrary line of sight elevation of 6 to the token. When you place a large creature, this line of sight elevation, if I can get onto the token, is set to 15, meaning that he is breaching my level because my level only goes up to elevation 10, as seen up here in the top right corner. So to fix this and have the token appear on the correct elevation for you, what you'd want to do is set the token height manually to something within the elevation that you have. So I will set it to 9 since my first floor is between 0 and 10. So now he's set to 9. He should appear on the ground floor for me. If I go back down to ground floor, there he is, and he's acting normally from my point of view. So that's just a little tip or trick that you might want to use when you are looking at large creatures in a levels scene. And while I'm on the topic of levels, I was just going to go over one of my level changes tiles, one of the interaction points, just so you guys get an idea of how they work. So here I have provided a name for this ladder. Black Rat Hall House 25 ladder. I only mention this because I added it with Tagger, and I do use it later in my triggers. So what happens here is all tokens are allowed to use this interaction point, and they can be controlled by anybody. It activates when someone double clicks on it. If you go over to our actions, the first action I have is I filter the tokens that have triggered it to make sure that they are within 1 grid square of the ladder itself. I just do this so people can't start using interaction points from anywhere on the map if they can see them. Then if I find any tokens that meet this criteria, we continue on to this show dialogue. What does the show dialogue do? Well, it simply says, gives them a little pop-up saying climb, descend ladder, and gives them the options yes or no. On a yes, if they hit the yes button after the prompt, it will take them to the yes landing, which is further down in my tile. And if they click no, it'll take them to the no landing. So here we can see landing yes, the token will get moved onto the top of this tile, the exclamation mark, which is directly where the ladder is. So it'll get moved on top of it, and then their elevation will change between 0 and 10. So this syntax here just allows us to have the token move between 0 and 10 elevation. If it's at 0 elevation, it'll move to elevation 10. And if it is at 10 elevation, it will move to elevation 0. Now, if you want to change this to be different elevations, you just always have to remember that the 0s would be replaced with the lower elevation, and the 10 would be replaced with the higher elevation between which you want the token to toggle back and forth. And that's all that would happen if they click yes. If they click no, they would skip the yes landing, and it would take you directly to this no landing, and there's nothing happening after the no landing. So on a no, the dialog box would just close, and there would be no further actions taken. Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of the little levels tutorial. I'm just going to quickly switch this to night so you guys can see what it looks like at nighttime, and hopefully show off some of these buildings I've made. So I'll just sign off now. Cheers. See you next week.